Welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're diving straight into a deceptively simple product planning case study. It is literally the perfect illustration of the real-world consequences of vague user stories. We're going to explore what I like to call the acceptance criteria that wasn't, featuring a note-taking app called NoteHub. Let's get right into it.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever watched a supposedly simple feature completely derail a sprint? Yeah, we've all been there, right? You plan what looks like an easy, quick win, and suddenly, boom, your dev team is putting out fires left and right. We are going to look at a highly relatable disaster today with NoteHub to see exactly how one tiny little assumption during product planning can cause a massive, system-wide crash in production. Okay, part one, the setup and the crash. Let's set the scene with NoteHub and look at the exact feature their team decided to tackle. Here's how it all started. The team wanted to add collaboration, so they wrote this user story. As a user, I want to share a note with someone so that we can collaborate. And, well, they paired it with an equally brief acceptance criteria. It just read, given a note, when the user shares it, then the other person can see it. I mean, it looks so innocent, doesn't it? Short, sweet, seemingly straightforward. What could go wrong? Well, the story goes into the sprint looking completely innocent. But fast forward 2 weeks to the sprint review, and reality hits the team like an absolute ton of bricks. They gather around, they're ready to show off all their hard work. But instead, things immediately go sideways.
Actually, during that sprint review, exactly 3 separate, completely unanticipated problems surfaced. We're talking 3 massive headaches that literally nobody saw coming when they drafted that one simple sentence.
Let's break those down. First off, the recipient could see the note, sure, but the person sharing it just assumed they could also edit it. Why? Because the story never actually specified view-only versus edit access. Second, and this is a big one, if someone tried sharing to an unregistered email, it crashed the app entirely, just a total meltdown. And third, someone finally asked the terrifying question, wait, which user are we talking about? Yeah, nobody clarified that the free tier wasn't even supposed to have this feature in the first place.
So, part 2, the autopsy, using the INVEST framework. To figure out what went so wrong here, we're going to put on our detective hats and diagnose the root causes. When we actually apply the INVEST framework to that original story, the breakdown is super obvious. I mean, sure, the story was negotiable and valuable. It passes those checks just fine. But it failed miserably on being estimable, small, and testable. Think about it. It completely fails estimable because the word share is just incredibly ambiguous. Do you mean view only or edit? It fails small because once you start factoring in edit permissions and tier restrictions, you're really looking at 2 or maybe 3 stories bundled into one. And it absolutely fails testable because saying the other person can see it completely lacks the specifics you'd need to write a solid test.
But honestly, beyond those INVEST failures, there was a massive glaring gap in the acceptance criteria. The team completely missed the unhappy path. They only wrote for the happy scenario where everything goes perfectly smoothly. But we all know that's not how the real world works, right? What about the edge cases? Completely lacking an unhappy path for dealing with non-existent user accounts is exactly what caused that massive app crash during testing.
And then, oh man, there's the opening phrase they used. Simply stating as a user introduced this massive role-level ambiguity that caused the whole free versus paid tier mix-up. Just a tiny adjustment. Literally just writing as a paid tier user would have entirely prevented that whole messy debate from the very start.
All right, part 3, the fix. Let's see how all of this builds into a revised, actually successful user story.
This right here brilliantly illustrates the power of specificity. By explicitly calling out paid tier and view-only access in the revised version of the story, they immediately eliminated 2 of those sprint review disasters right out of the gate. Boom! Done! There is absolutely zero ambiguity left about who gets this feature or what kind of access they're actually granting.
But the real magic? That happens in the new acceptance criteria. By taking the time to create robust criteria that explicitly cover both the happy path and the unhappy path, the team basically guarantees stability. Now, if a user tries sharing a note with an unregistered email, the app just handles it gracefully. It pops up a sign-up invite prompt instead of, completely crashing the entire system.
Also, remember those small and independent INVEST failures we talked about a minute ago? To fix those, the team correctly decided to split edit access sharing into a completely separate story. By decoupling viewing from editing, the dev work suddenly becomes predictable, it's manageable, and it's so much easier to actually test.
Okay, moving to part 4, the post-mortem questions. To wrap up this explainer, let's look forward a bit and connect these lessons to some broader product planning concepts that you can take right back to your own teams.
First up, I want you to think about this. Was the failure to make the story estimable or testable the true culprit here? Which one really did the damage? Think about how catching that lack of clarity during backlog refinement, like way before the sprint even started, would have changed the entire trajectory of that team's 2 weeks. It's a total game changer.
Next, let's consider prioritization frameworks for a second. If this feature had been scored using something like the RICE framework, how would those vague acceptance criteria have affected things? I'll tell you, it would absolutely tank your confidence score, for sure, which in turn fundamentally changes your prioritization. You just can't have high confidence in your effort estimates when your core requirements are essentially a guessing game.
Finally, I'm going to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. What if they had shifted from a traditional user story to a job story? Would that have naturally forced the team to consider the specific context and all those nasty edge cases that ruin their sprint? Often, when you focus on the situation and the motivation rather than just staring at a user persona, those hidden unhappy paths just kind of reveal themselves much earlier in the process. Definitely something to chew on before you sit down to write your next ticket.